Hey nerds, what's up? So I've had some advice swirling in my head for a while about self-published fantasy. I thought it was finally time to get it out there. I think that the quality of self-published fantasy is higher than ever these days. I think a lot of people are choosing to self-publish for various reasons that we have talked about a lot on this channel. And just in general, the access to resources is making self-publishing like just such a viable option for really great stories. And obviously my involvement with SPFBO is showing that as we, crown really worthy winners every year. In general, I feel like any complaint I've had about a self-published fantasy book or something I didn't like is also something I've complained about or didn't like about a traditionally published book. Like in general, it's just things I don't like about books in general that happen either self-published or traditionally published. So today I'm actually focusing on 3 things I just personally have tended to notice more in self-published books than in traditionally published books. Like I said, usually that's not the case, but these are 3 things that I feel like specifically have been affecting self-published books more. Now, before we go further, I want to say, as a YouTuber, I have sought out and looked up and researched so much advice about being a YouTuber. And some of that advice, even though it comes from really successful people or it's good advice, I have chosen to take or leave based on my own circumstances. Obviously, being a booktuber is very different than normal YouTubers, so there are some pieces of advice that I have to just realize don't apply to me. So this advice isn't supposed to be like, if you want to be successful in self-publishing, you have to do these 3 things. That's not my purpose. There's probably some advice I'm going to give here that you, for your individual circumstance, will have to take or leave. These are just things I personally noticed through my experience reading self-published fantasy, being a judge for SPFBO, and obviously the other side of it, which is that my husband's a self-published author, so I've seen some of like the background of the process there. So with that caveat, I'll see you after the jump. First up, I want to talk about editing, and we're gonna do a little story time. I feel like self-publishing has gotten a really bad rap for bad copy editing, tons of grammar and spelling errors and things like that. And I personally think it's a very outdated idea that self-published is really messy grammatically or editing wise. Unfortunately, it is a perception and reputation that has stuck around, and I think it's really starting to harm self-publishing. And one of the ways I think it's harmed self-publishing the most is that I'm noticing a lot of new self-published authors are conflating editing to only mean copy editing. I want to tell you guys that developmental edits are really important. And here's the thing, I've actually been keeping track of this stuff for the last while. Traditionally published books have a few grammatical errors all the time. In fact, I remember, or just copy errors. I remember opening Oathbringer for the first time. I'll flash it on the screen. There's an error on the table of contents, and I remember noticing that when it came out. And then while I've been reading, all of the illustrated Harry Potter books have an error. I found one in every single one of those. You know how many people have edited those illustrated Harry Potter books? One of the most famous books of all time. And I also found an error in Clash of Kings and A Dance with Dragons. Again, Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, one of the most famous fantasy books of our time, has had multiple editions, and yet still I find an error. Look, every book is going to have an error, and it really annoys me that reviewers focus so much when they find an error in a self-published book, because I could probably find an error in every single one of these trad-pubbed books. Now, obviously, if your book is riddled with errors, that's really distracting, and you need to make sure you edit it enough so that's not the case. But because I think everyone is so paranoid about reviewers mentioning like it was sloppy because there was an error, there's an over-focus on the copy editing. I'm not saying you don't need it. You do. I think you get my point. It's really important that you get beta readers, and in my opinion, it's important that your developmental editors follow 3 things. 1, they are people who actually read the genre or subgenre you are writing in. 2, you limit the number of people you give it to. And 3, they are people you are actually willing to take through and follow through on their advice. So first up, I understand that hiring a developmental editor is probably very expensive, and a lot of self-publishers don't have capital. I don't think you need to pay for a developmental editor if you don't have the money. I think friends or family can fulfill that role, with the caveat that they need to read your genre. I've talked to a lot of self-pub authors who like have their partners or their parents or someone read the book, and they're like, well, they never read that genre normally, but they loved my book. Okay, that's not people you want to take advice from. Of course they're going to read your book. I don't mean to be harsh. You want beta readers who read your genre. Zach, my husband, for his first book, chose me and our friend Brandon, who's actually been on my channel, so I can just say that. He was on my Wheel of Time video. He's a longtime friend, our D&D partner. He reads a ton of fantasy. I obviously read a ton of fantasy. He chose us because we were people he trusted and we were his audience. He wanted us to like the book because we were the kind of readers he was aiming for, so he could trust our advice on the things he gave us. I was a beta reader because I read a ton of the fantasy he was writing, and I also happen to be his wife, so that was nice. If Zach suddenly decided he wanted to write romance, I would not be a good person to beta read his novel. I'd read it because I love him and I want to support him and know what's going on, but he shouldn't take my advice. I don't know what romance readers expect. I don't know the kind of stories they like to read, so my advice wouldn't be useful. Number 2, when I say to limit the number of people, too many cooks in the kitchen, I feel like are really going to harm suggestions. If you're giving it to 15 people and they're all giving you separate advice, it's gonna be hard to make any movement, right? It's gonna be hard to know what advice to take and leave. Now you can do it. I just think getting a handful of people, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think it'll probably help it shake out a little more. That's just my personal advice, just a few. I think sometimes people let there be too many hands. And then finally, be willing to take their advice. Brandon and I gave Zach a pretty big change when we read his first book. He's told this story, I think, in interviews, but when me and Brandon read the book separately, we both came back to Zach and said, Chris, your main character, he's so boring. I don't care about him. And that was 1/3 of his main characters that we said, boring. And so Zach went and actually did significant changes to his book to change that. But Zach was willing to take our advice on it, willing to trust when we said, this is boring, that, hey, we were his type of readers and other people would probably think that as well. Now, it's important to note, we didn't tell him how to fix it. We gave him a lot of suggestions over the course of that trilogy. We never said, this is how you fix it. We just said, here's the problem, and then you as the writer get to determine how much you want to address that. That can be really hard. It can be hard to kill your favorite things. They call it killing your darlings. But ultimately, if you choose the right people who you trust to know the genre you're writing in, it's important that you're also choosing people you're willing to listen to. Okay, that was a long piece of advice. My second piece of advice is super quick. Please, please, please Google your title before you release your self-published book. If you type in your title and book and some really big things come up, I highly recommend you change your book title. This comes from the experience, actually, of my slush pile and SPFBO. I would be Googling the titles of these books, nothing would come up. I'd Google the title with book, nothing would come up. Couldn't find it, even on Amazon. Finally, I'd have to type in the entire book title and the entire author name to get it to come up. That is bad. I should not have to type the entire book title and your author name. Casual readers probably aren't gonna remember the author name. I certainly didn't. I had to keep going looking up exactly how to spell the author name and get it up there. Most of the self-published books, if I put the title and book next to it, would come up. But there were some people who chose books they clearly didn't Google that had books already by that name that were much more popular, making it very hard to find your book. So, quick Google search. This is simple SEO. I'm not saying it has to be something that's never been heard of before, but if another book comes up and it has a decent following, highly recommend you tweak that title, because one of the hardest things of self-publishing is getting your name out there, and you don't want there to be like a huge mountain for people to sift through to get your book. Okay, and finally, my last piece of advice for today, I saved the most controversial for last. I think this actually might ruffle some feathers, but I'm gonna say it. Let's start with something that's not controversial. One of the best things about the book community and the self-published book community is the community, is the people you meet. You will hear that from everybody. If you talk to booktubers, what's the best part of being on BookTube? The community, the friends you make. We will all say it. It's incredible. Through my YouTube and through Zach's self-publishing, we have made some incredible friends, people we meet up with for lunch, people who we, send wedding gifts to, like our friends. And the best part is it's worldwide. So we have visited and traveled to other countries and been able to always have a friend to see in those other countries. And it's been seriously one of the most rewarding things to just feel like you have this great network and community and just people that are some of the coolest, most awesome people. Even if your book or your YouTube channel or whatever doesn't go anywhere, the friends you make, it's really the important part. That's cheesy. It's true though, and you can ask anyone, they'll all agree. Okay, glad I got that out there. There is a cynical side to this, and now I'm gonna talk about it. In general, you don't wanna alienate your peers, right? For reasons because it's fun and you make great relationships, but also just like business sense. You don't wanna alienate your peers. In that vein, we're finally getting to the crux of my advice, which is, if you are seriously going to pursue self-publishing as an author, I don't think you can also be a serious reviewer. I know that's controversial because I know a lot of people want to do it, but I have data to back this up. I looked at a ton of traditionally published authors' Goodreads accounts, a ton, both new to the scene, old to the scene, younger generation, older generation, all sorts of authors. And I discovered what I expected, which is either authors on the Goodreads don't have any books, or they have books, but they're either no rating or 5 stars. Now, I first got this idea because Brandon Sanderson talked about it. I can't remember. He has so many podcasts, so many AMAs. I have no idea where I heard this. But he talked about how, he doesn't feel comfortable reviewing his peers' books. And so if there's books he really loves or really wants to highlight, he does put them up on his Goodreads as 5 stars. I think he only has 12 books. But otherwise he reads and, he doesn't review them because he doesn't feel like it's his proper place, as these are his colleagues, friends, and peers. And it seems that everyone's kind of mutually agreed on this. All the authors I saw, it was the same thing. They either had 5 stars and no, just a ton of stuff they showed that they had read with no ratings. Some people only did no ratings. Some people only had a few books up there that they clearly thought were 5 stars and didn't say anything else. But it's very clear they're not acting as a reviewer for their peers. There was actually only one author who I looked up because I thought he might be a little chaotic, who did do a couple 1-star reviews, and that was Patrick Rothfuss. I totally called it. But he only 1-star reviewed a few comics, and he had very specific reasons for doing that. And I wouldn't say comics are necessarily his peers, right? So even still, I think that was a little chaotic, but still, I think there's a huge reason for that, and I think it's very obvious. So if you are going to be a self-published author and now you are also deciding that you want to review a bunch of self-published works, honestly, and not just hype up your peers, I think that could be a problem for you. And I don't think it's wise. Now, there are some caveats to this. I think if you started as a reviewer, so for example, Elliot Brooks or Daniel Green, they made their big names first as reviewers and then self-published. I don't think that's necessarily as much of a conflict of interest because they started as reviewers. Even then, I feel like they're probably careful when they're reviewing other self-published works. I do think there is still a divide between trad and self. So if you wanted to be a reviewer just of trad-pubbed books and always just kind of, support your self-published, I think there's a way to do it. But personally, I'd be wary of reviewing a ton of self-published books if you yourself are also an author. I think they kind of exist in 2 different spheres. Either way, I'm just advising caution. Okay, that's my 3 pieces of advice. I hope they were helpful. Who am I for you to listen to if you don't think it's helpful? Let me know below if you're a self-published author or hoping to be a self-published author what you think about this advice. I'm curious. I'm sure people are going to disagree with me on that last one, so go ahead, let me hear it. I want to hear all your arguments for it. As always, if you like these kind of videos, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I am currently reading, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. And if by chance you're watching this video and you haven't heard of SPFBO, which is the self-published fantasy blog off, you can watch my video explaining it, but you should definitely check it out. It's an easy, fast way to find some great self-published fantasy. I'll see you next time. Bye.